First, let's talk about the issue of asylum seekers, and I'm glad to be joined to my left by an MEP from Greece, Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
You are from the Socialist Group. You also belong to the PASOK party, which is the party of the new Prime Minister of Greece, George Papandreou. Facing you from Poland, Jacek Protasiewicz. Hello, sir. Now, you are from the Conservative EPP, European People's Party, here in the Parliament, and you belong to the party of Donald Tusk, the Civic Platform. Well, gentlemen, thank you for being here. Before we talk about the situation in your countries, I'd like to take a look at the overall figures concerning asylum seekers for 2008. Let's take a look. Mr. Protasiewicz, we'll talk about a specific situation in your country later, but I'd first like to hear your opinion. Those figures from 2008, we know that Europe has long been a shelter for people fleeing persecution and violence. Do you think that Europe still lives up to its reputation?
Yes, I do. When you compare the number of asylum seekers, let's say in 2008 and 10 years earlier, we can see that 50% less people are trying to obtain asylum status, which means that either less people are in need in the world, or more of them understand that this is not as easy as it used to be to obtain this specific legal status, which should be granted only to people who are in danger in their countries, and not to those who are just looking for a better life and who are leaving their homes purely for economic reasons.
Talk about your country, but first I'd like to talk about Poland. Now, you come from a country which looks a bit like an exception when you compare it with other European countries, because in your country applicants are more likely to receive asylum. Actually, 63% of applicants receive asylum rights. Why is it that Poland has become a new haven for asylum seekers?
I wouldn't say new haven, because when you compare numbers, not percentages, you will see that those who are looking an asylum in Poland are 10 times less than, for instance, in France. However, that is true that Poland, with its history, with the communist regime and a huge wave of migration in the 80s, is a country which understands that there are some regions in the world close to Europe, like
mainly Russia. 90% of asylum seekers come from Russia and Chechnya.
From Russia, namely from Chechnya, which is a region of being absolutely in the war situation, and the war is very cruel there, and that's why I think that Polish authorities are more friendly to those people, and the Polish nation is more open to help them, because we remember it used to be in Poland 25 years ago, when our fathers and brothers, older brothers, were leaving the country because they were at risk of life or being arrested there, and they were looking for a better life or a safe life in France, Germany, Spain or Sweden.
This Parliament here, all of us, only a few months ago, voted a legal document, a report, having to do with common asylum procedures in Europe. And it emphasized the importance of mandatory, this is the word, solidarity, that ought to be owed to countries of the South.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I'd like to ask Mr. Protasiewicz, is Eastern Europe showing enough solidarity when we see that Greece is facing a big crisis? Do you think that Eastern Europe should be more active and that the burden should be shared more equally in Europe?
Let's say, in my opinion, it should be done like that. But still there is a question about the obligatory of that solidarity, because please remember that Eastern European countries, or newcomers to the European Union, are not well prepared for sheltering as many as, for instance, Sweden, Germany or France.
Demands are accepted. Mid-January, the Greek government said it would reform its laws and respect the Geneva Convention. That implies a better cooperation with countries on the borders of the EU and a real solidarity between member states, enabling asylum seekers to find a home in...
Mr. Lambrinidis, we heard very strong language there in this report. A man on the beach saying that Greece had become a rubbish bin in Europe. Is that your feeling?
Well, he said that other countries were dumping people who didn't want in Greece. Look, first of all, let me just say I'm very pleased at Poland's desire to participate in this pilot program. But let me emphasize as well that the importance in the Parliament's view, the majority of the Parliament's view, of mandatory solidarity. We claim that we have a common European asylum policy. I ask that it become common and truly European. It is not common today, because what happens mostly is that countries who receive the vast majority of people are left alone, and
that's
the rest
the
of the countries...
so-called Dublin Convention, which means
that is correct.
Asylum has to be requested in the country through which the migrant enters Europe.
Exactly, granted, and the person has to then stay there. So if Greece is a relatively small country with huge numbers of people coming in, imagine countries like Malta or Cyprus or others, then it's not really European, because the result of this is, among other things, that in many cases countries who receive these big waves cannot treat as they ought to, as it is their obligation, those asylum seekers with the humanity that they deserve. And one of the fundamental European values, of course, is humanity. Now, what I ask, and what this Parliament asks, is that we sit down and stop this ping-pong game of responsibility thrown back and forth. No, it's not my fault, it's your fault. No, it's the other person's fault, not my fault. And sit down and plan a true common European asylum policy, not simply to support the countries in the region, such as Greece, that receive the biggest numbers, but mostly to offer the protection and humanity that those people deserve.
Mr. Protasiewicz, it looks like a mess, isn't it? Well, we saw these images there in Greece. Why is it so difficult to deal with immigration and asylum seekers more particularly?
For several, I think that with illegal migration is even more problematic and more difficult to tackle. And why it is so difficult? There are two reasons, perhaps. One is purely, let's say, political, because people in our countries in Europe, which I can understand, are afraid of those who are coming, particularly legally, and are bad educated, not prepared for integration, and may be seen, sometimes perceived as those to whom they have to compete at the workplace.
But here we're talking about people who are fleeing violence, who are fleeing persecution.
In most cases, yes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but this is I do agree with Mr. Lambrinidis. Those who are entitled to seek for this legal status of a refugee, of people of asylum seeker, are maybe 30% of those who are coming to Europe looking for a better life. And that's why we have a social problem from one hand, and the second problem is, of course, so-called asylum shopping. I mean, those who were able to reach Cyprus or Malta because they are the closest to the northern Africa, would prefer to move very quickly to Sweden or to Germany, because the conditions offered by those governments are much better. That's why
that shows that this is a very strange system indeed, because a lot of those people we saw there in those detention camps in your country, living in very difficult conditions, don't actually want to stay in Greece.
Is from guess which country? Iraq.
Of course.
Should that be a surprise to anyone watching this show? Of course. Europe, lacking a common foreign policy in these issues, which in my view should be one that promotes peace around the world and the peaceful resolution of conflicts as much as possible, was dragged in a war that apparently no one really truly wanted or believed in. And now we're facing the consequences. Is it those poor peoples whose only crime is that they're trying to escape war or poverty? Is it their fault, or is it ours for not having appropriate policies?
Lambrinidis, I'll have to interrupt you there, I'm afraid, because we're desperately running out of time. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking part in this debate.